Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Social Flight Live. I'm Jeff Simon. We have a wonderful show for you this evening. Adrian Eichhorn is here with us soon after, or just barely after, his flight over the North Pole in his Bonanza. And so we're going to talk with Adrian, learn all about his life story, as well as this latest really amazing adventure. Before we get started, as always, a few notes. Tonight's broadcast will be recorded and available on SocialFlight's YouTube channel. Just go up to YouTube and type in one word, Social Flight. And with that, also be sure to check out SocialFlight.com and the free SocialFlight mobile apps for Apple and Android devices. We have tens of thousands of aviation events and destinations, so many cool things to do. And you know, we've been watching General Aviation make its comeback from the pandemic, and it is so wonderful to see all of these fly-ins and pancake breakfasts, Young Eagles events, and things like that coming back. So in addition to all of these online events like Social Flight Live, in-person fly-ins and are coming back, and you can find them by going to the socialflight.com or SocialFlight mobile apps. It's all free. We are here to support you and General Aviation. And with that, we also have prize giveaways and so many other things. So be sure to check that out as soon as you get a chance. Now, with that, I would like to turn to my guest. Adrian Eichhorn is a pilot, he's an instructor, a mechanic, an adventurer, and an aviation educator. His work as a professional pilot includes flying for the Washington Redskins, now the Washington football team, General Dynamics, NASA, the FAA, and as a captain for JetBlue Airways. He's type rated in the Airbus A320, a slew of Gulfstream, aircraft, and many other makes and models, really too many to list here. And Adrian's also a second-generation pilot. He learned to fly from his dad, a decorated U.S. Army aviator who fought in World War II and the Korean War. But to most of us, Adrian is known for his solo flight around the world in 2016, and recently his amazing flight over the North Pole just weeks ago. I'm going to bring him online now, and I personally consider him a friend and a mentor. I'm thrilled to have him join us this evening here on Social Flight Live. Welcome, Adrian. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Jeff. Thank you very much, and it's really an honor to participate on Social Flight because you guys are doing so much great things for aviation to help bring it back, and the outreach is just incredible. So thank you. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. Listen, you're, as I said, a friend, a mentor. I consider you an inspiration, and we created the show for inspirational people. So I'm thrilled to have you here. Take everyone back a little bit and tell us a little bit kind of from the ground up about how you got to where you are in aviation, because now you're in a place that we can tell, of course, these stories of these amazing adventures. But a lot of people have a path in front of them, and you do a lot to inspire people. So what was your story?
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, you know, my father was an Army Air Corps aviator. His sister was a flight attendant. My father's brother was a pilot in the Air Force, retired as a major general, and went on to fly for Northwest. And I wanted to be a pilot since I was a kid. So I thought I had this all planned out. I didn't have the means. I wasn't fortunate to even fly, or my father didn't have an airplane after he retired. So I had this great plan to go into the Army, become an Army aviator, fly a helicopter, and live happily ever after. And so I went and I got a degree in civil engineering, and then I realized that the Army says, you're too smart to be a pilot. And I said, well, that's not the case. And they said, well, okay, you're too valuable to us to be a pilot because you have a degree in civil engineering, so we're putting you in the Army Corps of Engineers. So got commissioned, served 21 years in the Corps of Engineers, and after about 4 years on active duty, I realized the Army was not going to send me to flight school. So started taking flying lessons out in Oakland, California. Bought a 150 with an eye doctor for $5,000, and we built time and then bought a Seminole and got all my ratings. And for the last 15 years before I retired, I spent almost every waking minute teaching, doing anything to get that valuable hour so I would be competitive, and stayed in the military for 21 years and then retired and started my professional, I hate saying professional, started flying because we're all professionals at this, or at least we should be, and hopefully everybody thinks they are. Then I started flying and it's been a great run. 15 years with JetBlue. That was a dream come true. And I went to the majors to JetBlue when I was 50 years old. And, you know,
Really?
when I started back in the 90s, you pretty much had to have a lunar landing and a PhD in aeronautical science to get a job in thousands of hours. And I thought, oh, I'll be too old. But, you know, I think the message there is you just stick with it and get all the young people. I know this last year has been difficult with the pandemic and all the furloughs and early outs and that. But the bottom line is there's opportunities out there that you can't predict in any profession. And I stuck with it. And ironically, now I'm flying a Dash 8 for the Army. It's an ISR, an intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance airplane out of Manassas. And, you know, 40 years after I graduated from college, I'm now in an Army airplane with an Army call sign on an Army mission. So you might want to say I took a little of a diverted path, but finally flying for the Army, and it's great. So
circuitous route to get there, but you managed to do that.
Yeah,
I love this because then I get to get information I don't even normally get from you. And I didn't realize that it wasn't until you were 50 years old that you started with JetBlue.
I did, Jeff, and that was a tough decision because I was flying November 1 for the FAA. I was the administrator's pilot, and we weren't doing airway inspection or flight checks. We were flying all over the world. We had 26 memorandums with government agencies from, you know, the Attorney General, Health and Human Service, Secretary of Transportation. We would transport high-profile prisoners. We would transport explosives for Homeland Security. So we went all over the world. And I could probably write a book after every week that I was there. There was never a dull moment, but we had 4 airplanes. I was type rated on the G4, the G3, and the Citation Excel at the same time. And I love aviation. I don't mind working, but if I had 4 days off a month, that was an easy month. And even though that was a phenomenal job, met a lot of great people, saw the FAA from the inside out and not the outside in, which was really enlightening. Met a lot of fantastic people, but I had my sights on the airlines and a schedule. And, you know, we supported the NTSB, so there were many times I'd get called out at early hours in the morning to go fly, say, to Chicago for the Southwest incident or for a train down in North Carolina, something, and take the NTSB Go team. So it was a tough job to leave. Paid very well because we got overtime. We worked really hard, but we were going to a different country. I took Secretary Mineta to Beijing, Shanghai, Tokyo, Sapporo, Anchorage, and, you know, it's the type of stuff you could write a book at. Then going to JetBlue, I couldn't write a book after a year because it's all kind of repetitive and the same in a good way. You know, I had a much better quality of life, being able to bid a schedule. And as everybody knows in the airlines, when you set the parking brake and leave the airplane, you don't have to worry about a sales meeting coming up or something. It's just, you're on your own. So that's when it's like, take the airline uniform off and put the coveralls and go turn wrenches on a Bonanza or teach flying. So I've been fortunate. I'm blessed. Right place at the right time.
Cool.
Work
now,
hard.
Before you move, there's a term you used in the beginning, N1. What is that?
November 1. It was the administrator's Gulfstream. That's the N number.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of funny stories with that. When you go overseas, ICAO doesn't really accept a 1-digit N number. So I remember one time going through, I think, Swedish airspace. It's like, November 1, you know, tell us your full call sign. Ma'am, it's November 1. No, it's November 001. And I remember saying, ma'am, it's whatever you want it to be. We have 1 digit on the side of the airplane. Well, I say that I was an Army guy, and they gave me a short N number so I wouldn't forget it.
I like that. That's funny.
But, you know, it was a beautiful airplane, painted just like Air Force One, baby blue on the bottom with the gold and United States of America. And then we also flew November 2 and November 3, which were Citation Excels for shorter trips. And there's something cool about showing up in Moscow to pick up astronauts and bring them back in a plane that's labeled United States of America. especially after you spent 21 years learning how to fight the Soviets, but now they're Russians. And so, yeah, it was fascinating. I'm pretty lucky.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. Now, somewhere along there, you mentioned turning wrenches, and obviously you're an A&P and IA, and a lot of stuff that you do involves turning wrenches. How do you make that transition?
Real quickly, I owned a Seminole when I was in Oakland. That's how I built my multi-engine time. I bought in a partnership with another guy, and then it was a lot of back scratching. I'd find a mechanic and say, hey, I'll give you free flying lessons if you let me do a 100-hour inspection with you to save cost. And Danny Miller out at Bay Aviation in Oakland, California, this is the late 90s, said, if you're going to be in aviation for a while and you enjoy stuff like this, you might want to think about becoming an A&P. So he kind of got me going in that direction. And quite frankly, when I bought the Bonanza, I was tired of the plane not being ready on time, the plane not being fixed properly, and the cost being more than what I thought it should be, or more than what was estimated. So I thought, these airplanes, it's not technology like you're working on a 2020 car with all these computers. The technology of these airplanes is pretty old, and as you know, it's a skill, and you kind of have to really learn, because you can screw up the simplest skill. But so I really took an interest in that, and having an engineering background, I've always been a tinkerer and a builder, and it really took off when I bought the Bonanza, because I bought this airplane, I think I paid $35,000, didn't have a pre-buy on it, trusted the seller, and then I find out it had 2 gear-up landings and had a lot of issues, and I kind of fell in love with it and just kept working and working and working, and here, 30 years later, it's finished. But I use that as a tool to log a lot of the time under the supervision of 3 other IAs to get my A&P. And I recommend anybody that's thinking about it. It's a lengthy process, but it's like anything, just keeping track of the time, and you can become one if you really want to make the sacrifice and do it. Because there is a serious shortage, as you know, of maintenance technicians out there.
There is, and I'm a huge fan of using the experience method of being able to get your A&P. That's also how I got my A&P and my IA, and of course, as you know, Jake just got his A&P, and all through that. I mean, there's the schools that are out there are absolutely wonderful, but you have to be able to dedicate the time, and it has to be your absolute career path in most cases to do that. And so the more mechanics that we can get out there through that technique, the better. So that's how you got it. And then,
I think, I'm sorry, on that note, I don't want to miss this, because I think it's so important, but the more you know about your airplane, the safer pilot you are. And on a trip like this, where you're in Iceland or going somewhere, like on a round the world trip, if I'm in Sri Lanka and there's a problem and I can't fix it, it can make that trip a pretty, not a very enjoyable adventure. So, yeah, I encourage anybody to get involved with owner-assisted annuals and learn more about their airplane.
Yeah, I've always thought that even if people don't progress all the way to getting their A&P, we seem to really do ourselves a disservice in general aviation by how little we really teach student pilots about the aircraft themselves that they're flying, other than checking the oil and cleaning birds' nests and making sure you don't have a flat. I mean, it's just so important to understand what does it mean when something's, when the engine's running rough.
Absolutely.
There's a lot that we could help people out with.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tell me about then the evolution of your plane here. I'm going to bring up a beauty shot, I like to call it, because your plane is absolutely gorgeous. And so there's a couple here of it, and of course this is you along with another Earth rounder.
Yeah, that was with Chinzi. That was a shot that AOPA took when Chinzi came out here, and we were talking about, his story is phenomenal, and he personally is one incredible individual. As you know, he's blind in one eye. Japan wanted nothing to do with him in reference pursuing any type of rating in Japan. Came to the United States, got a degree from Embry-Riddle, works for Boeing now, active flight instructor. He reached out to me after my round the world trip, and I kind of blew him off, because a lot of people will reach out with the thought of doing it, but they never do it. So you kind of have to, focusing on who's serious. And then once I realized he was serious, it's like, wow, he's a real deal. So he got that airplane, and he landed last Friday after going around the world on the 11th. Did it successfully. So the plan was, and as we did, he flew here into Manassas, and we flew as far as Iceland together, and then he went on his way. And when I was in Iceland, I wasn't sure where I was going to go because it depended on the weather. And that was kind of sad parting ways, because he's really a first-class guy. He's a real comic. And when you see him, I always kid him, Chinsey, you need a little bit of personality. You're too dry. He's a great guy, and he made it. And he did it with just 120 gallons because he could not get a field approval for a cabin tank for additional fuel. So my hat's off to him. His trip was way more difficult than mine because of the countries that he had to stop in, because he simply couldn't fly as far. So he did it the hard way.
Wow, and that's and there are some pretty funny videos for anyone out there who wants to go check it out over there. I think some of them perhaps are on your YouTube channel at Fly Blue Horizons.
Yeah.
But there's others probably on YouTube that show you guys in Iceland. That's really
Oh, Jeff, it was so much fun. I wish we had about 4 hours to talk about this, because flying up there together, and I knew Chinsey had never, I had the benefit of having flown corporate and made position reports and flew in ICAO airspace and all that happy crap. But, we were going like from Greenland over to Iceland, and I'm saying, okay, Chinsey, we're talking on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just on the Unicom or that frequency. And I said, okay, give me a practice position report, so when you talk to Icelandic control, you sound really good. So we had an absolute riot, and it was fun helping him, and he did it. So
that's so.
This whole thing is to motivate people that if he can do it with one eye with a handicap, and Japan didn't want anything to do with him, and unfortunately, because of the pandemic, though, he couldn't even spend any time in Japan. Landed at the field by his home airport, and saw his mom on one side of the fence. He couldn't even give her a hug, so he took off, and they only allowed him to get gas. So that's disappointing. But yeah, it's pretty neat. There are no one-eyed handicapped aviators in Japan. So
wow,
yeah, neat story. So I love that picture there. Both P model Bonanzas. How ironic is that? They're about 50 numbers apart in serial numbers. And
yeah, that really is amazing. I want to share now, because when you mentioned about what it takes to actually, have the fuel to do it that he didn't have the benefit of.
Yeah.
So here's here's one of the things that makes that possible.
I know. I'm 6 feet tall. That's one big gas tank. That's without getting too far into detail, they're referred to as Dolly Partons. I know I'm not supposed to say that, but that's reality.
You're allowed to say that on this show.
It's great. I am in Washington, D.C., though, so my computer might shut off in a few minutes. So, yeah, they're old military drop tanks that Frank Hale, that was an engineer down in Texas, and a couple of the guys procured. They had them weld up. They used to fly experimental category, and then over time we got a field approval. I was fortunate to get a field approval to put those on mine. And of course, for CG and weight and balance, I can't fill them all the way up, but they hold over 100 gallons each. And the plane flies incredibly well with it. It's stable. There's no yaw that the Bonanzas, V-tail Bonanzas inherently have. So that's my ticket to freedom. I took as much weight out of the airplane to get my basic empty weight down below 2,000 pounds. So it allowed me to carry enough gas. And
that's just unbelievable. And so those were drop tanks that turned into tip tanks.
They were
and
230 gallons. Pardon me?
What aircraft were they originally on?
I'm not sure. I never asked Frank or Wayne Collins about that. They were 230-gallon tanks initially, and then they were cut down and shortened and modified by a guy up in Wisconsin. And there was a lot of flight testing that Frank and the guys did. And fortunately, I was able to get a field approval on it. But subsequent to that, the FAA has taken away the FSDO's ability to do any field approvals for fuel systems on airplane, which I think is a shame.
Yeah.
So anybody like Chinsey that wants to go around the world, in my opinion, it puts him more in an unsafe place, because he's going to have to go to countries that he could have bypassed that may not be that aviation friendly, or there's inherent risk with weather or terrain. you know, because people are going to continue to take these flights. There's adventurers out there. And so it's kind of a one of a kind now. I believe there's 3 airplanes. Adam Broom has an A36 with them on, and Wayne Collins' airplane has them. So there's only a handful left.
Wow, that's something. So tell me a little bit about what went into, you know, first of all, what went into you making the first decision to start becoming an adventurer beyond just you know, all the things that were in your pilot resume up until that point, and then you know, why the North Pole? What brought that on?
Well, a couple of things there. The first part, Bill Harrelson, I have a tremendous amount of respect and admiration for him. He built a Lancer 4 with his wife, Sue, has the world distance record of over 8,000 nautical miles, flew from Guam to Jacksonville, Florida, 39 hours. He made a trip around the world over the poles. It took him 2 attempts. And then he flew around the world. And recently, last year, I think it was, he got back, he beat Max Conrad's record. And Bill inspires me. I mean, I've obtained a lot of ratings. I've done pretty much everything I've wanted to do in aviation. There's certain airplanes I'd still love to fly. Unfortunately, I've never flown a Boeing. I flew the Airbus, the Gulfstreams and that. But I thought, you know, what else can I do? And I thought, I want to push the limits of long distance flying. And I started talking with Bill Compton a few years ago, who is a real first class gentleman. Motorcycle accident, paralyzed from the waist down, and he still flies oceanic flights in his Bonanza. If that doesn't inspire you, I don't know what does. Here's a guy, he can't even check his own oil. And he has a tough time getting in and out of the airplane, but he doesn't let his disability stop him from pursuing his dream. I choke up every time I think about him. And Bill, I started talking with Bill about a year or so before the round the world trip, and he's talking about maximizing the range and fuel burns and altitude and the Carson method and slowing down as you get lighter to extend your range. And at that time, I'm thinking, Bill, after flying 16 hours, there's no way in HELL I'm going to slow down. I'm going to go faster so I can get there. But on this trip, I used Bill's method, and I pretty much had to. So he was one of the early guys. But Bill Harrelson, I asked him, you know, what we were talking about adventures, why he did it. And he said, well, he's kind of always been an adventurer. And I thought, you know, we're right out of the same mold there. And then I was watching one of his interviews, and the definition of it as an adventurer is someone that goes on a journey where the outcome is unknown. And I thought, you know, that's kind of true. That's not why the reason we do that, but in some way that inspired me, because you start thinking about so many things that you wouldn't normally, think about on an everyday flight. On these long distance oceanic flights, and it's particularly the one over the pole, you don't ever want to have any single point of failure. And oddly enough, I'm flying a single engine airplane, so I probably lose credibility with saying that. But, you know, if you have one life raft, I took 2. You have a couple different means of communication if one fails, you know, HF, and then I had a SATCOM phone. We can talk more about that later, but I think those guys kind of inspired me, and I thought, you know, the Bonanza is a remarkable airplane. And the early Earth Rounders, the guys down in Texas, Wayne Collins, Doc Weisner, Frank Hale, that have gone around the world multiple times with those tip tanks, that really inspired me to do some long distance flying. And I love it. I absolutely love it. There's nothing like getting out over the ocean in that airplane with your raft, all your survival stuff, and you're doing it, and everything is working perfectly.
That is so amazing.
Yeah.
So tell me about the decision and what went into planning for the North Pole.
Okay. Yeah, that one, you know, at Oshkosh after the round the world trip, so that would have been 2017, a bunch of us got together, and then of course the question came up, what's next? And we kind of joked, well, we can't go to Mars, but we could go over the North Pole. so we started planning that, and the original plan was to have 3 Bonanzas and go in formation, and that never happened for a number of reasons. But I thought, you know, that really would be kind of cool. Bill was telling me all the things that he Bill Harrelson, about what he had encountered flying over the North Pole navigationally with True North and Magnetic North. And I thought, I really would like to see that part of the world, even though it's just frozen ice pack. But from Greenland up, because I made many crossings in corporate jets and in airliners going to Europe, and never really saw Greenland because it's normally overcast with clouds. And the day I took off out of Iceland, there wasn't a cloud within 1,000 miles. So I flew up the entire east coast of Greenland with not one single cloud. And the only really bad thing about this trip, Jeff, I want to go back. It's so beautiful. The glaciers, the snow at 10,000 feet covered mountains. And yeah, that's a little layer of cloud, but I think at 12,000 feet there. Those are mountain peaks sticking out of the snow. So that part of the trip, it's like, man, my prayers were answered, because I was really anxious the night before, and for really 2 months before the trip, I was looking at the weather pattern on Windy and on SocialFlight and thinking, I don't know what route I'm going to take. Originally, I was planning to go to Norway, go up to Spitsbergen, Norway, which is the closest airport to the North Pole. It's only 750 miles, and I thought, I'll go out of Spitsbergen. Well, that wasn't going to happen because you can't get a landing permit there. Because of the pandemic, there's no hospital, so they're really careful on who that comes in and out. So, I talked with John and with Bill Harrelson the day before I left, and we said, I think I can go straight to the pole and then down to Fairbanks. The weather was perfect, the winds were favorable, and John Whitehead was a god to me. I mean, he made this trip safer and more enjoyable. When I got up at 6 o'clock in Iceland, on my phone were about 10 different emails with the weather for the day that he was sending me from his home in Dallas, Texas, which was 11 or 12 o'clock at night. Wow. And he stayed up for 24 hours. We constantly text back and forth. I would send him my position reports, which is a really interesting story in here in a minute, my nav log, my fuel burn, my gallons remaining, my oil temperatures, my cylinder head temperatures, the winds that I were reading. And he was monitoring the flight, and he had gone on SocialFlight and made a profile for my airplane with the 550 and was tracking what he predicted my fuel burn would be at my waypoints, at my position reports. And we talked back and forth on the SATCOM phone a number of times, but primarily relied on the SATCOM text, on the Iridium text, which was perfect. And it was so comforting to know that I am in contact with somebody in case something happens. So, the plan was to get to the North Pole and make a decision based on how much fuel I have, because if you start thinking about it, to fly 20 hours, to fly 35 or close to 3,500 nautical miles and expect perfect weather the whole way, that just doesn't happen. But John did a lot of study. And around the North Pole, he referred to one of them as you'll have like a resonant low pressure system. The weather on the pole is generally pretty good. So there was a big low pressure system over Russia and a big low pressure system over Canada, which affected me in the way that I had a slight headwind going to the pole. And then, from the pole, I had a tailwind all the way to Fairbanks. And I had to file for Fairbanks because it's a airport of entry for customs, but I never expected to make it there. I thought I'm going to have to either land in Point Barrow or Dead Horse and do a tap dance or probably pay a fine. But got to the North Pole. I'd been talking to Bill Harrelson and been talking to John. They're looking at everything, and he said, you can make Fairbanks.
Wow.
Yeah, that was really pretty cool.
Talk people through your route here, because this is a good image of your route.
Yeah, that big white spot is the country of Greenland. And what was so nice about that, to go over to Spitsbergen or to Tromsø, Norway, would have been a 4-hour flight across the North Atlantic, where your chance of surviving up there with the ice pack would be very, very slim. So up the east coast of Greenland, I had the scenery to entertain me the whole way. There's 4 different weather stations up there, and I found one that had a Unicom frequency, so I was talking to this guy, and 5 people live in this little weather station for 4 or 5 months of the year. And that conversation went on for about 15, 20 minutes, and he said, well, what kind of jet are you flying? I go, I'm not in a jet, I'm in a Bonanza. And so that was really entertaining, and that part of the trip I feel I could have survived if the engine quit, because the snowpack and the ice, plus it was crystal clear. But then once you coast out up around 85 north, and if you look at this, my waypoints are 5 degrees of latitude apart. And the airlines, they generally do 10 because they're flying at a faster speed, because ATC wants to hear from you about every hour, either through an ops normal report or a position report. So I just picked latitudes going up. So saw the entire coast of Greenland and just most spectacular scenery that I had ever seen in my life. And then
we've got some of those pictures here.
Yeah, look at that glacier coming down, and you know, not a cumulus or any type of a cloud as far as you can see. So then once I got to pole, it was turned to a heading of about south, and it sounds so simple, but you know, the magnetic North Pole is south of true north. So the strangest thing, you're flying all the way up there, and the Abaddon GPS never lost its position. There were about 5 or 6 times it lost it momentarily, but it came right back. But you think about it, your airplane and your navigational units, it's getting magnetic information from your magnetometers, and then the GPS is getting a signal from where the satellites, where it's at. And I think it kind of scratches his head and said, I'm not really sure I know what to do here, because even I at this point don't really know. I'm still digesting this, because quite frankly, I was expecting when you went over the North Pole to be like flying over VOR. Your compass would just switch, and it's like, oh, I just went over the North Pole. But so you go over the true North Pole, and I turned to a track heading of about 180 degrees, and my HSI still says I'm heading 340. And it's like, I'm still heading north and I'm tracking south. But if you think about it, because the North Pole is south of your position, all this is starting to make sense. And the magnetic North Pole happens to be on the longitude line that I went down. I went down, I think, on the 155-degree longitude line, and its current position is at about 86 north, 156 west. And it's moving 35 to 50 miles per year towards Russia. So navigationally, and Bill had warned me about this, he says, it's going to be a challenge. And he says, what you're going to have to think about is you can't rely on your HSI or any of your nav units. And I said, well, I have my standby Dynon D10A attitude indicator. He says, you're just going to have to keep your wings level, and that unit doesn't get information from any other system on the airplane. And ironically, so I had the iPad, because I had talked to a number of people about that, and I've used iPads in airplanes for years, as many of us have, that the iPad is only getting information from the satellites. So it had my track, it had the winds aloft, and it was dead nuts accurate the whole way. So when I crossed over the North Pole, I'm looking at the iPad and it's saying 188, and I had calculated, yeah, that's roughly that's my heading, yet everything else in the airplane is pointing in different directions. And that actually lasted for about 6 hours, from about 80 north all the way to 80 north on the other end. And I had talked with Tammy Woods from Abaddon. They provided the 550 for the Bonanza when I did the panel upgrade, and she connected me with their engineers. And on the Abaddon, you have a feature that you can take it out of magnetic reference and put it in true reference, so that helps. So the Abaddon performed flawlessly. The Dynons performed flawlessly. I was really concerned about the temperatures. How are these screens going to work, or moisture or temperature? But knock on wood, everything worked perfectly. But you can see in this course here at the top center, I'm tracking 178 degrees. It shows the airplane going the opposite way. And the one thing it did, which was kind of interesting, is on my flight plan, the North Pole was waypoint 10. And it was almost like walking a dog. The dog wants to go smell whatever it wants, and you're just on a leash. It would keep sequencing to another waypoint, like waypoint 11 or waypoint 12. And I'm like, no. So I'd re-go direct, and then it was like, okay. So, but it was about 6 hours, I think, of the flight before things started to get back to normal. And like I said, Jeff, I'm still figuring it out. I've got my polar plotting charts, and I took a lot of pictures of where I was at and trying to fully understand it, because obviously it's something we've never done in our flight training. And you know, that a note on that, that trip was 20 hours, and it seems now looking back that it was a 2-hour trip, because you're so mentally engaged with, you know, watching your cylinder head temperatures, your oil temperatures, just looking down at the frozen ice pack below you, thinking, God, pray this engine doesn't quit, because your chance of survival up there in the broken ice pack is probably not going to be very good. So it's just, it's something you really can't explain all of it. But I try to tell people that the reason the trip went well was simply I had the best ground support team available. You know, John was there with me the whole while, as was Bill Harrelson, texting and talking, and that made it fun and safe. And just all the support from Bill Harrelson over the years, telling me which airports north of the Arctic Circle to go to and what the consequences would be there if they had fuel and they didn't have fuel, if I would have had to divert. But just having those guys in my back pocket, and then incredible weather and favorable winds. So,
wow, that's and I love the shot.
Yeah, there's no Starbucks in Iceland, but I found a grocery store that had those little double shots, and I had, I think, 12 of them with me. And of course, my peanut butter. Chinsey and I made peanut butter and jelly sandwiches before we took off. It was kind of our parting meal together, and I thought, I do need to be careful what I eat on this, because going number 2 would not be easy, because the airplane's pretty cramped. So, you know, the body worked pretty good too. It cooperated. But,
that's awesome.
you know, and then, of course, Superior Airports, Scott Hayes, who's their director of marketing, he helped me get the new 550. They provided the parts. Pinnacle built the 550. I had about 100 hours on that engine, and that engine purred. I used just under a quart of oil in 20 hours. And
wow,
opened the engine compartment when I landed in Fairbanks, and it's like it had never left the hangar. Nothing was leaking. Everything worked perfectly. And yeah, it was pretty cool.
Isn't that amazing? And I love, I have to show this one. I love this. This is you're the most interesting man in the world shot, I think.
Yeah, I have to admit, it's a selfie, because obviously nobody took it, but I thought of getting a bottle of Dos Equis, and when I landed in Anchorage, I said I was going to, you know, ask the customs guy, can you do a little video here and say, you know, I don't fly over the North Pole often, but after I do, I drink Dos Equis. So I was trying to look manly with a little bird.
I gotta say that's a heck of a pose there. That's you have a new headshot to use.
Yeah. So back to the iPad. The iPad was like, it's remarkable when you think of the technology with ForeFlight, and I had it connected with a Stratus 3 to ensure that I got as good of satellite coverage as I could, and that was comforting in itself, because remember, no single point of failure. I thought if I have an electrical failure with the panel, I've got this iPad and I'll still be able to fly, and have lots of backup batteries, backup electrical sources and stuff. So just little things like that years of training, and I think the practice and the experience of going around the world really helped me on this trip. And you know, if anybody ever asked me, well, would you recommend that I would do it? I would say absolutely, but not without a lot of practice and a good ground support team first. Because, you know, I kind of joked that, wow, it went perfectly. And it seems in some ways it was really easy, but that comes from, you know, 26,000 hours in a logbook and a lot of experience. So you can't underestimate that. I kind of forget about that, and I'm a little cavalier on how easy it was. But I think the reality is it's just I'm at a point in my life that everything that I've learned, I used on this trip.
Right. Well, Adrian, I always believe that the trailblazers and folks like yourselves that do these dramatic adventures, it doesn't have to be that people are looking to do the North Pole in particular. I
Right.
think one of the wonderful things that can come out of seeing this is to push and encourage more pilots to get out of their current comfort zone, and instead of doing just the $100 hamburger or just the local thing, to consider a cross-country trip or to consider one of these other things, because those are always amazing adventures. We do those. I do those with the boys every year, and we've never had one that wasn't an adventure one way or another, with lots of unplanned stuff and amazing stories along the way. And I always come back wishing that for more people.
Yeah, it's like this young 18-year-old kid, Ben, flying a Piper Cub to 50 states. How cool is that? He'll remember that for the rest of his life, and hopefully that'll inspire other people to, you can do it. You don't have to have a Malibu or a Bonanza. You can do it in a Piper Cub and have a riot. So, that's the cool part of this. Yeah.
It is. It's really something. So, I mean, what advice do you have to people? We spend a lot of time on young people, obviously, getting into aviation. I like to dedicate a little bit of time and energy to those people who are pilots, and maybe like yourself, you transitioned your career at age 50, but there's people out there who maybe have a plane, haven't started a lot of adventure stuff. What would you say to them to get out there, who those folks that maybe have the means now to take some time off and consider doing some things outside their comfort zone?
Yeah, I look back at my life, Jeff, and I'm very thankful that I was able to find something at a young age that I was very passionate about. Because I think for a lot of us, a lot of people go through life and they never find something they're really passionate about. So for the people that are passionate about aviation, don't go 75% of the way. Don't walk, run, and give it 100%. Make the sacrifices. If it means not buying a new car so you can pay for flight lessons, do it. You have to make sacrifices. You can't sugarcoat it. Becoming a pilot in this country is easy in some ways because you have a lot of opportunities with flight schools and all the companies like AOPA and EA that support becoming an aviator, becoming a pilot, getting a rating, but it is expensive. And it does take an enormous amount of sacrifice. I look back the 15 years that I was on active duty in the military. I didn't get married. I spent almost every single night, every weekend, logging time, building hours, knowing that I'm going to get in that cockpit someday. So I think to sum that up, it's a huge sacrifice. I could have never had a family on an Army officer's income and pursue, both in terms of time or financial means, the ratings that it would take and get the hours. It's easier now because the amount of time, the shortage, I think in another year or two is going to be back even greater than it was before because so many people took an early out when the pandemic hit. But all I can say is make the sacrifices and do it. If you truly love it, there is a way. There's scholarships. AOPA has them. EAA has them. Organizations have them. And go for it 100%. Don't walk to flight school. Run to flight school. It's our fellowship of airmen. You hang out at airports. You meet people, and like I said, 40 years after graduating from college, if somebody would have said to me, especially when I realized the Army was not going to send me to flight school, if they would have said, you're going to be the administrator of the FAA's pilot, you're going to fly an airplane for NASA, haul astronauts back from Moscow, go down to the shuttle landing facility, be a captain at JetBlue, and then 40 years after you wanted to, you're going to fly a Dash 8 for the Army, I would have said, you're talking about somebody else. You're not talking about Adrian's life. So, you have to get your ratings. You have to get the experience. But when you do that, the opportunities will come. That's the great thing about America and general aviation. As we all know, it's not in other countries. On the round the world trip, the one thing that still sticks with me is when I landed in Cairo and met Eddie Gould and Aman. They were my handlers from General Aviation Support Egypt. There's 20 million people in Cairo alone, and I landed at 6th October Airport, and Eddie, we went to dinner with this heart surgeon, and he was the only, at the time, aircraft owner in the whole country of Egypt. And they had allegedly had five licensed general aviation pilots. And there's no flight below 8,000 feet in Egypt. So you look at that in stark contrast to what we have. The opportunities are out there. And for young people, if they have this passion and they want to go, they just got to get a mentor. They got to connect and make the sacrifices, because I tell you, John Whitehead flew for FedEx. He retired as the #1 pilot for FedEx. Bill Harrelson was with American, and they loved their careers. I got started late, so I was never tainted by doing the same thing for 40 years. And a lot of people said, oh, when you go to the airlines after 3-4 years, you're going to hate it because it's kind of the same thing. You have all a support network helping you, but I loved it more when I left than when I started, because you get good at it. You know the company, you know your abilities, you know the airplane, you know the system, you know how passengers are going to react or not react. And it just, it was an incredible career, absolutely incredible career.
You used a term that I've heard, of course, you used before, your Fellowship of Aviators. Tell me a little bit about that.
I've had people that have helped me out, more so from home builders that I met through EAA, that I met at the airport that I'm at. Bob Pastusik built a Lancer 4P, helped with a lot of carbon fiber stuff, and Ed Smith, the guy that had a Bonanza and a Lancer 4, and now he's restoring another. The help that I got from those guys and the support, and like you look at John Whitehead, I asked him kind of at the last minute, and he stayed up for 24 hours monitoring my flight, checking it to make sure that was okay. Yeah, that's Fellowship of Airmen. We have that I think few other hobbies or professionals have.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it when people connect in order to do that. I mean, when you really think about it, it's probably the only way that people really get into aviation. They will always connect to someone, and it's not just getting into aviation; it's how you progress within it. Like for someone to make the leap to becoming an aircraft owner, I never would have made the leap with it if it weren't for mentors, if it weren't for people I came across with that were like, oh, you absolutely have to do this. Like, even if they were sugarcoating it in order to get me to do it. Same thing for becoming a mechanic. The same thing for all the other things in there. We're those connectors. I love that about it.
Yeah, and I just ask that, and I know there's other pilots who'll do the same. The kids that I think are lucky are their dads that are airline pilots. They owned an airplane and they start flying really young. And I know a number of guys like that, and they're just going to be on Happy Street for the whole rest of their life. So, yeah, it's pretty cool, Jeff. It was
so what are you doing? So what are you doing these days? What's happening now that you got back from the pole?
Well, flying the Dash 8, we do verification and calibration flights and we modify these airplanes. The company I work for is Leidos. There's top secret stuff in the back, which I don't even know, because my top secret clearance isn't completely finished yet. And so we go out and we do calibration and verification flights so they can make sure that all the equipment in the back, the cameras, the listening devices, everything else is good. And then we turn the airplanes over to the Army. And I don't know what I'm going to do when I grow up, Jeff. I'm trying to think of the next chapter. I had an opportunity to go back to JetBlue and fly Part 91 flights, aircraft delivery, but because of my move and stuff, it wasn't quite right. So I'll have to figure that out. There'll be another opportunity, which I probably can't even predict at this point. But it's just, for me, it's sad that the FAA is so damn narrow-minded and says that when you're 65 years old, you can no longer fly. Because I just figured it out, and it took me a little bit longer, but when it comes to age, my opinion is one size does not fit all. I know some guys that are much older or much younger than what their age reflects. And for me, to lose all that experience in the cockpit is tragic to the air transportation system. But it's the way it is. I was hoping it was going to change, but it didn't. And of course, then the pandemic hit. So yeah, I was forced out last December, and I miss it every day. It's great, great company, great pilots, great training center. Everything about it was fantastic.
I will say I got a real kick out of the fact that I think Ben, my son Ben, brought me a picture that was off of Reddit or something like that the other day. He was saying, "Oh, all these people were speculating at what this ADS-B track was that was going in a circle around Hagerstown, and we're talking. It turns out it's Adrian."
Yeah, we flew last Friday, 6.8 hours in a 5-mile orbit. Not the most, it's not like 6.8 hours, I'd normally be in San Diego and going down to have a good meal with the first officer. So it's not the most exciting flying in the world, but the plane's going to a good mission. It's going to help save soldiers' lives because of the information that it collects. And it's fascinating. It's a neat airplane.
It's amazing.
So many antennas and balls and stuff.
What's coming next here? Like South Pole?
Yeah, if John is listening to this, my phone's probably going to ring in 10 minutes saying, Eichhorn, don't even ask me to be your ground support team, because I think I told him when I landed in Fairbanks, or maybe even when I talked to him, I said, John, if I ever even mention doing the South Pole, just send me to a psychologist. Don't even entertain it. But, now that the dust has settled, I am intrigued by the challenge. I don't know that it's possible because of the distance. Bill Harrelson and I have been talking about that for years. And the great thing about Bill, I would never try I couldn't in a Bonanza compete with his world records, but if there was even a chance of it, he'd be the first one there to help you how to do it, which is incredible. It's not like, it's like, that's my record, I want to keep it for life. So I'm intrigued by that. It's a beautiful part of the world. So we'll do some planning and some risk assessment. And if I think that it's possible, I'll do it. If not, it's like, okay, it's a bridge too far. But the airplane is capable, and it's just, is the pilot willing to take the risk?
Adrian, knowing you, this is your coy way of saying that you're going to the South Pole. But I'm just going to say, okay, well,
it'll be a year from
that one and see what happens.
Well, if I do, Jeff, it won't be this January. Bill Harrelson studied the weather for years, and there's a couple-week window in January that it's favorable. The winds are favorable, and so it wouldn't be this January. It'd be next January, and by then, Bill or John will have probably blocked my phone number and hide if I even mention it. But all kidding aside, I'm not sure. I'll do the planning first. I am intrigued by the challenge of it but I don't want to just continue to push, because, I reflect back on this trip that you're making a flight where there's really no plan B for a good portion of it. And then you have to make the decision, is it really worth doing that? So the answer is yeah.
Excellent. That's a very, very good point. Well, Adrian, thank you so much for taking the time this evening to join us here on the show. I really appreciate it. Would love to have you back as time goes on. We'll talk about more things, but it's always a treat, and I really do appreciate you taking the time.
Well, thanks, Jeff, and continue to do what you're doing, because we out here in the field and appreciate it. And I know everybody's looking forward to Oshkosh. I'll see you there.
Absolutely.
And just safe travels, buddy.
Yeah, we will absolutely be there. And for everyone else who's joining us, thank you for spending time this evening here on SocialFlight Live. And we have a couple more shows before we wrap up our season, and we're going to be off for a month. So next Tuesday, the 22nd, Brian Schul, combat veteran and SR-71 Blackbird pilot, will be joining us. Oh, what a fascinating story he has to tell as well. And then our last show before the break is June 29th, and that's Barry and Brian Schiff coming back to talk all sorts of cool training stuff, including the impossible turn and more with those two. And I can't think of a more wonderful way to end that portion of our season. And then it is just a complete month of adventure flying. We're going to be heading out to Yellowstone. We're going to go to Oshkosh and so many more things. We'll make some videos of that to share with everybody. And so with that, again, Adrian, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. It's always a pleasure to hear what you're doing and to watch and learn from you. I really cherish that. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Jeff. It's Fellowship of Airmen.
Absolutely. And
You
to
bet.
everyone else out there, thank you for your time, and I wish you all blue skies.